My son called. His voice was low, hesitant. Madison thinks we should keep the wedding small, just her family. Could you just send the check, Mom? We'll handle the rest. I had just mailed a $20,000 deposit to the Oak Ridge Banquet Hall, the biggest venue in our little corner of Iowa. I'd pictured lanterns strung across the garden-long tables, filled with laughter cousins driving in from 3 states away, the Collins name carried with pride. And now, in a single phone call, I was erased. Without me, there would be no wedding. And friend, let me tell you, when life tries to write you out of your own family story, you either bow your head or you find the strength to pick up the pen. If you've ever felt discarded after giving everything, you'll want to stay with me for this one. Because what came next changed the course of my son's marriage, my family's dignity, and even how I see myself. Short pause. Tone softer, confiding. And before we go further, if stories about family loyalty and quiet strength speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's the only way more people who need to hear this can actually find it. Now back to the call that cracked my heart open. Daniel wasn't cruel, not my boy. But I could hear the strain in his voice, like someone else had written the words he read to me. Madison, her family, they had wealth polish, a kind of country club confidence I'd never known. And me, I was the widow from a small town, hair silvering too early, who raised him shelving books at the public library. I thought this wedding was the one place where it would all come together, his world and mine stitched side by side. Instead, his words cut like November wind across the cornfields. Just her family, Mom. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the deposit slip still warm from the bank, and stared at the old photo of Richard, my husband, in his army dress blues. He'd been gone 20 years, but in that moment, I could hear him plain as day. Don't let them take what you've built, Maggie. The house smelled faintly of apple pie cooling on the counter the way it always does when I'm anxious. I bake when I can't sleep, and Lord, I couldn't sleep. My hands shook not from age but from betrayal. $20,000. A promise written in ink. And suddenly, I was nothing but a checkbook to be mailed. I thought back to Daniel as a boy, standing in the bleachers after a baseball game, dirt on his knees, waving at me like I was the whole world. Back then, he knew who carried him. When he scraped his knee, he cried for me. When he made the honor roll, he ran first to the library desk, flashing his certificate like gold. I had been his anchor, his witness, his home. Now his silence on the line told me I'd been demoted to background noise. Still, I couldn't scream. That's not who I am. Folks in Oak Ridge say Collins women don't break, they bend, they wait, they hold their dignity tight. So I ended the call softly. We'll talk later, sweetheart. But when I set the phone down, the kitchen clock ticked louder than it ever had. Something in me shifted that night. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one truth: I would not be written out. And that lower voice leaning in, that was the moment destiny knocked on my door. The morning after that call, I woke up before the sun. Couldn't sleep if I tried. The frost still clung to the edges of the window, the kind that paints lace patterns across the glass. I sat there wrapped in Richard's old flannel shirt, staring at the checkbook like it was an enemy I hadn't known I had. I thought maybe, just maybe, Daniel would call back. Tell me he'd been tired, that Madison had gotten carried away, that he didn't mean it. But the phone stayed silent. And silence can hurt worse than words. By noon, I knew it wasn't some misunderstanding. Madison herself called. Her voice was as sweet as maple syrup, but it carried the weight of a dismissal you can't mistake. Mrs. Collins, I hope you understand, she said, all polite and polished. It's just easier this way. Intimate, streamlined. My parents have so many important guests flying in, and we don't want things to feel crowded. Crowded. That was the word she chose. My sisters who drove 6 hours for every graduation. My church ladies who prayed for Daniel when he was sick at 10. My cousins who showed up with casseroles the day Richard's casket was lowered into the ground. All of them crowded. I pressed the receiver to my ear, fighting the sting in my chest. Madison, I said carefully, family isn't clutter. It's roots. And Daniel has just as many roots as you do. She paused, then gave a little laugh that wasn't really laughter. Well, I suppose that's one way of looking at it, but Daniel agrees. So, we'll move forward as planned. You've been such a help already, Mrs. Collins. We truly appreciate it. The line went dead before I could answer. I sat in the kitchen so long the ice in my sweet tea melted. My hands trembled, and for a moment I thought I might actually just crumble into pieces on that linoleum floor. Because it wasn't only about me being shut out. It was about my boy, the one I carried for 9 months, siding with someone who saw us as background noise. That night, Ruth came over my older sister. She knocked twice, then let herself in like she's always done. She saw the check stub on the counter, the photo of Richard propped up beside it. She didn't ask questions at first. Just set down a casserole dish, poured us each a glass of iced tea, and sat across from me. Finally, she said, "They're freezing you out, aren't they?" I nodded, throat tight. He asked me to just send the check, Ruth. Like I'm nothing but the bank. Ruth's jaw tightened. That boy may be grown, but he's forgetting who raised him. And that girl, she's showing her colors early? Money can buy chandeliers, but it can't buy class. Her words should have comforted me, but all I felt was the weight of humiliation. It pressed down like a quilt too heavy to breathe under. Later, when she left, I wandered upstairs and found myself in Daniel's old room. The trophies still lined the shelf. Faded pennants from Little League games, a shoebox filled with letters he'd written to Santa when he was 7. I sank onto the edge of the bed and clutched one of his old baseball gloves, the leather cracked and worn from too many summers. The smell of it brought tears I couldn't hold back anymore. Because this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about being erased from the story of my own child. And in small towns like Oak Ridge, news travels faster than trains. Within 2 days, folks at church were whispering. I caught the way Mrs. Jacobs tilted her head when she asked, "So Maggie, how's the wedding planning going with that pitying smile people use when they already know the answer?" The worst came at the grocery store. I was standing in line with a basket of flour and sugar when I overheard 2 women from Madison's side of town chatting near the bakery counter. "They're keeping it exclusive, thank goodness," one said, lowering her voice just enough to sting. Can you imagine all those Collins relatives cramming into Oak Ridge Hall? It would have looked like a potluck instead of a wedding. Her friend laughed. Well, at least they got the deposit money out of the mother. Smart girl, that Madison. I froze right there, staring at the white bags of flour in my hands. I wanted to march over to shout. But instead, I set my groceries on the counter, my face burning. That night, I couldn't even bake. My oven stayed cold. I just sat in the dark, listening to the old grandfather clock, tick, 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 until it felt like it was carving the seconds into my skin. If you've ever been treated like an outsider in your own family, you'll know that pain. It's not loud. It's not even visible to anyone else. It's the quiet ache, the hollow in your chest when you realize the people you love most are willing to forget you for the sake of appearances. But somewhere beneath all that sorrow, a tiny ember still glowed. I didn't recognize it then. At the time, I thought it was just anger. Anger at Madison, at Daniel, at myself, for handing over $20,000 without blinking. What I didn't know was that ember would soon turn into something stronger. Something that would keep me from being erased. For now, though, I just let the hurt sit heavy. I whispered into the silence to Richard's photo on the mantel. I won't let them do this to us. Not to me, not to you, not to the family that held us up all these years. The house didn't answer back. But I swear, in the faint creak of the floorboards, I could almost hear Richard's steady voice. Hold your ground, Maggie. Hold your ground. I wish I could tell you that after those nights of crying into Richard's old pillow, things got better. But the truth is, humiliation lingers like smoke after a fire. You think it's gone, but it seeps into your clothes, your skin, your very breath. By the third morning, I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped waiting for Daniel's number to light up my phone. Instead, I pulled open the drawer where I kept every bill, every receipt, every paper tied to that wedding. My hands shook as I shuffled through contracts from the Oak Ridge Banquet Hall, the florist downtown, the string quartet Madison insisted on. And that's when I saw it plain as day in bold black letters at the top of the page, contract holder, Margaret Collins. Not Madison, not her parents, me. I ran my finger across the ink like I had to feel it to believe it. After all the whispers, all the pitying looks at the grocery store here was proof I hadn't been erased. Not yet. That ember inside me flared. I called Ruth. I need you to come over, I told her. She heard something in my voice, something steadier than tears, and arrived in 15 minutes flat. We sat at the kitchen table, contracts spread out between us. I pointed to my name. See this? They can't move forward without me. Ruth's eyes narrowed. Well, isn't that a twist? So what are you going to do, Maggie? I took a long breath, the kind that feels like pulling courage up from your toes. I'm going to stop everything, every vendor, every plan, until they remember who's footing the bill. For the first time in weeks, Ruth smiled. That's my sister. I didn't waste a second. I picked up the phone and dialed Oak Ridge Hall. The manager, Mr. Lee, answered chipper as always. Good morning, Mrs. Collins. We're excited to move forward with the... Stop, I cut in gently but firmly. Put everything on hold. No caterers, no decorations, no scheduling until I say so. He hesitated. Is there an issue? Let's just call it a matter of clarity, I replied. My tone carried honey, but the steel underneath was undeniable. When I hung up, my heart was pounding. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something stronger control. That afternoon, I walked through Oak Ridge's Main Street chin held higher than I felt inside. The cold bit through my coat, but I kept walking, passing folks who had probably heard the gossip. I didn't care, because in my purse, tucked neatly between the checkbook and my reading glasses, were copies of those contracts. My proof, my shield. I even stopped by the florist, Mrs. Alvarez, who'd known me since Daniel was in diapers. She looked surprised when I told her to pause the order. But Maggie, she said softly. Madison came in last week picking out roses. She said everything was finalized. I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Well, Madison isn't the one signing the checks, is she? Mrs. Alvarez blinked, then nodded. Good for you. Those 3 words wrapped around me like a quilt on a cold night. Good for you. Someone finally saw me not as background noise, but as the woman still holding the reins. That evening, Ruth came back with a peach cobbler and 2 mugs of coffee. We sat in the living room fire, crackling low contracts stacked neatly on the coffee table, like soldiers waiting for orders. You sure you're ready for this? She asked. I don't have a choice, I said. If I stay quiet, they'll erase us completely. If I stand up, maybe, just maybe, Daniel will remember who he is, who we are. Ruth reached over and squeezed my hand. Then you fight, Maggie. Not with fists, but with what you've got. And right now, what you've got is paper and power. We laughed just a little, the kind of laugh that slips out when fear and courage collide. But later that night, alone in bed, I whispered into the dark. Richard, I hope you're proud. Because I'm about to fight the battle of my life with contracts and signatures instead of guns and boots. The house creaked in reply like it had so many nights before. And for the first time since that call, I closed my eyes and felt not hollow, but ready. Ready to remind them you don't write Margaret Collins out of her own family. Power feels sweet the first day you hold it. But life has a way of testing whether you're strong enough to keep it. It didn't take long for Madison to notice what I'd done. 2 days after I froze the contracts, she showed up at my house unannounced. Her silver SUV gleamed in the driveway like it didn't belong in our modest neighborhood. She stepped out in high heels, coat trimmed in faux fur, looking like a magazine ad against my cracked sidewalk. I opened the door before she could knock twice. "Mrs. Collins," she began, lips stretched into a smile that never reached her eyes. "We need to talk." I let her in, though the chill from outside seemed to follow her. She sat on the sofa like she owned it, crossing her legs, perfume sharp as citrus. "I spoke to the planner," she said briskly. "She tells me everything is on hold. Caterers, musicians, flowers. That's not acceptable. We have timelines." I folded my hands in my lap the way I used to when librarians scolded noisy students. "Well, Madison, nothing is acceptable without the contract holder's approval. That's me." Her smile faltered. "This wedding is Daniel's and mine. You're making it about yourself." The words landed heavy, but I didn't flinch. "All I want is for both families to be honored." "That's not selfish. It's fair." She leaned forward, her diamond catching the afternoon light. "If you love your son, you'll let us handle this. Don't embarrass him. Don't embarrass yourself." Her tone carried the chill of a threat wrapped in silk. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "Madison love means making room, not shutting doors. Until I see that room made for us, nothing moves forward." Her eyes flashed, and for a second the polish slipped. She stood, grabbed her purse, and left without another word. But she wasn't finished. The very next day, I received a call from Daniel. His voice was taut, fraying at the edges. "Mom, what did you say to Madison?" She came over in tears. "She thinks you're trying to ruin the wedding." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. "I'm not ruining anything, Daniel. I'm protecting what's right. You may not see it now, but—" "Mom, please," he cut in, his tone pleading but weary. "This is already hard enough. Madison's family is doing so much for us. Can't you just let this go?" That last line nearly broke me. Let this go. As if decades of sacrifice, of love, of building a life for him alone after Richard's death could be set aside like yesterday's news. "I can't let go of family," I said softly but firmly. "Not now, not ever." There was silence on the line, the kind that makes your stomach knot. Then he muttered, "I'll call you later," and hung up. For the first time in years, I sat at that kitchen table and felt a new kind of loneliness, worse than widowhood, worse than gossip. The loneliness of knowing your own child might be choosing someone else's comfort over your dignity. By Saturday, Ruth had convinced me to attend the planning session Madison's family scheduled at the banquet hall. "You can't fight this battle from your kitchen," she said. "They need to see you." So I ironed my best cream blouse, clasped my pearls, and walked into Oak Ridge Banquet Hall with my head held high. The Whitakers were already there. Madison in a sleek navy dress, her mother Evelyn with posture sharp enough to cut glass, and her father Charles fiddling with his cufflinks like time itself was a nuisance. Daniel stood by the window, shoulders slumped, caught between worlds. The planner, a young woman named Haley, tried her best to keep the peace, flipping through swatches and menus, but tension thickened the air. "I've invited my cousins from Chicago," Evelyn announced smoothly, "and we'll need to ensure the seating reflects proper balance. Balance." I asked, though I knew where this was going. She gave me a polite smile that stung more than a slap. "Yes, dear. We can't have the tables looking uneven. Madison's side will naturally be larger given circumstances." Circumstances, another word for erasure. I set my hands flat on the polished oak table. "The Collins family will be represented. 30 guests. No less." Madison's binder snapped shut with a crack that made Haley flinch. "This is exactly the problem. You're turning a refined wedding into a circus." Evelyn's smile grew tighter. "Margaret, we appreciate your contribution, but refinement requires difficult choices. Surely you can see that. Inside, my pride burned hot as coal. On the outside, I poured sugar into my voice. Refinement in my book means everyone feels welcome. For a moment, silence pressed against the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. Haley scribbled in her notes like she wanted to vanish. And I knew then I wasn't just facing a spoiled bride or her proud mother. I was standing against a system that believed money meant ownership. Walking out of that hall, I felt both smaller and stronger. Smaller because they had cornered me, made me question my place. Stronger because even in their polished contempt, I hadn't broken. That night, I stood on my porch. The Iowa sky stretched wide and cold above me. The stars flickered like witnesses. I whispered into the dark. Richard, I'm being tested, but I'll hold my ground. And though the wind cut sharp across the fields somewhere deep inside, I felt that ember flare again. This battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sometimes the ground shifts all at once. One moment, you're standing in quicksand, and the next, you realize the solid rock was under your feet the whole time. You just had to plant yourself firm enough to feel it. That's what happened the morning I walked into the second planning session at Oak Ridge Hall. I had spent the night before ironing Richard's old handkerchief, the one he carried all through his Army years. Slipping it into my purse wasn't about luck. It was about courage. I told myself I will not be erased. When I arrived, the room was already thick with tension. Madison sat at the head of the table binder, spread open like a general's map. Evelyn, her mother, perched beside her with that faint smile of superiority that never seemed to slip. Daniel stood off to the side, looking more like a guest than a groom. His tie slightly crooked, his eyes downcast. Haley, the young planner, shuffled her papers nervously as I took my seat. Well, Madison began crisply, we've wasted enough time. Let's finalize the seating chart today. Evelyn nodded. Yes, and given the size of Madison's guest list, I think we can agree that only a handful of Colin's relatives would be appropriate. Immediate family, perhaps. Immediate family. They meant me and maybe Ruth. 30 lives condensed into 2. I didn't argue, not yet. I waited, letting their words hang in the air like smoke. Then quietly, I pulled out the thick folder from my purse and laid it on the table. Before we continue, I said, my voice calm, I think we should review something important. Haley looked curious, leaning forward. Madison frowned. Evelyn's smile tightened. I opened the folder and slid the first page across the polished oak surface. This, I said, is the signed contract for Oak Ridge Hall. As you can see, the contract holder is Margaret Collins. Silence. Then Madison laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. That doesn't matter. My parents are covering the catering, the decorations. It matters. I interrupted, my tone still soft, but edged with steel. Because without my signature, there is no wedding at Oak Ridge. And without Oak Ridge, there is no wedding at all. Haley blinked. She's correct. Legally, nothing can proceed without Mrs. Collins's approval. The room froze. Evelyn's hand tightened around her pearl necklace. Daniel's head shot up, eyes wide. Madison's face flushed crimson, her composure cracking like thin glass. You can't do this, she hissed. You wouldn't dare. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly. I already did. Every vendor is on hold until this family I looked straight at. Her remembers that it takes 2 families to build a marriage. The silence was thick enough to taste. Daniel finally spoke, his voice shaking. Mom, is this true? I met his eyes. Yes, Daniel, and I didn't want it to come to this. But when your fiancé decided my family was clutter, when she asked me to be nothing but a checkbook, she left me no choice. His face drained of color, and then fate played its hand. That very evening, Daniel went out with his old college buddy Mark, trying to clear his head. They ended up at the Brass Lantern, a bar downtown where young professionals gathered after work. I wasn't there, but word travels fast in Oak Ridge. Madison swept in with a group of bridesmaids, her laughter carrying across the room like broken glass. She didn't see Daniel at first sitting in the corner nursing a beer. One of her friends asked about the seating mess. Madison rolled her eyes loud enough for half the bar to hear. "Oh, it'll be perfect," she said, smirking. "Daniel's family won't be there to ruin the photos. No embarrassing small-town bumpkins cluttering up the place. Just us. Just class." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Laughter followed, and that was the moment the crack in the illusion. Mark told me later that Daniel went pale, his hand frozen around the glass. He looked at Madison like he was seeing her for the very first time, not the woman he thought he loved, but the architect of his family's erasure. He left the bar without saying a word. The next morning, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I heard the voice of the boy I raised, not the man being manipulated. "Mom," he said quietly, "I was wrong. I see it now." His voice broke. "I'm sorry." I swallowed hard, steadying myself. "Daniel, you don't owe me perfection. You owe me honesty. And now you have it." He drew a long breath. "Then I'll stand with you. With us." When we walked into the next meeting at Oak Ridge together, the air shifted. Madison's face tightened when she saw him by my side. Evelyn's lips pursed, sensing the tide had turned. This time, I didn't wait. I placed the contracts on the table again. "Here are my terms," I said evenly. "The Collins family 30 strong will attend. No exceptions. And at the reception, there will be a toast acknowledging both families equally. That condition is not negotiable." Madison sputtered. "That's ridiculous." Daniel cut her off, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "It's fair. And if you can't accept that, Madison, maybe there shouldn't be a wedding." The silence that followed was thunderous. Madison's eyes widened, fury barely contained. Evelyn looked away, shaken for the first time. I sat back calm as the eye of a storm. For weeks, they had tried to erase me. But now, the balance was restored. "And let me tell you, friend, there is no sound sweeter than the silence of people who thought they had all the power, realizing they've lost it. When a storm finally breaks, it doesn't always roar with thunder. Sometimes it unravels with quiet clarity, like curtains being pulled back, letting the truth stand naked in the daylight." That's how it felt in the weeks that followed the confrontation. The Whitakers tried to regain control. Evelyn called me twice, her voice syrupy, but sharp beneath the sugar. "Margaret, surely we can come to a civilized compromise," she'd purr. But what she meant was surrender your power and let us win back the narrative. I didn't budge. "The compromise has already been made, Evelyn," I told her evenly. 30 seats. A shared toast. That's as civilized as it gets." She hung up without saying goodbye. Madison, meanwhile, began to crack under the weight of her own mask. Her friends whispered about her outburst at the bar, the way she mocked Daniel's family. Oak Ridge is a small town. Gossip travels on the wind. Within days, what was once a tightly guarded image of the Whitakers' refinement was blemished by rumors of arrogance. At church potlucks and grocery aisles, I saw heads shake, whispers pass. "Did you hear what Madison said about the Collins family?" Reputation like glass shatters easily. Daniel came by more often after that. At first, he seemed hollow ashamed. He sat on my porch, staring into his coffee mug like it might tell him what to do. "I should have defended you sooner," he murmured one evening. The cicadas hummed like a chorus behind us. "I let her words, her family's money, make me forget who raised me." I reached for his hand, rougher now than it had been when he was a boy, but still my son's. "You lost your footing, that's all. What matters is you found it again." His shoulders eased, though his guilt lingered. Sometimes he'd glance at Richard's photo in the living room, as if silently asking for forgiveness from the father who couldn't answer. Meanwhile, Madison waged her own battles. She tried to push back with vendors showing up at the florist demanding orders resume. Mrs. Alvarez called me the same day. She was furious, she whispered over the phone. But I told her, I can't take a step without Mrs. Collins's approval." She stormed out. There was satisfaction in that moment, not cruel, but steady. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't caused a scene. I'd simply stood my ground, and the world now echoed it back to her. One evening, Evelyn arranged a dinner at the Whitakers' estate, inviting Daniel and me. Their home was everything you'd expect: chandeliers, marble floors, portraits of ancestors staring down like judges. We sat at a long mahogany table, the air perfumed with lamb roast and unspoken tension. Evelyn lifted her glass of wine. "Margaret, we invited you tonight to smooth things over. We believe in appearances after all." I smiled politely. Appearances are delicate things, easily broken if there's nothing behind them. Her lips tightened. Madison stabbed at her plate, silent. Daniel cleared his throat, then spoke with a firmness that startled even me. "Mom's terms stand," he said. "If you can't accept them, then maybe this wedding isn't meant to be." The words sliced through the room. Evelyn froze. Madison's eyes welled with angry tears. I simply sipped my water calm as the eye of a hurricane. After that night, their fight drained. They had lost the leverage, and they knew it. The wedding moved forward under new terms invitations mailed to every Collins cousin, church friend, and neighbor who had stood by us. When they received them, some cried over the phone. "I thought we'd been forgotten," one cousin whispered. "But you didn't let that happen, Maggie." That was the real victory, not humiliating Madison or Evelyn, but restoring dignity to the people who mattered. Yet still, Madison simmered. I could see it in her eyes at fittings, in the stiff way she posed for photos. She smiled, but her jaw clenched. She had wanted a stage polished clean of imperfection, and instead, she had to share it with a family she deemed unworthy. That was her price, the loss of control, the public knowledge that her will had been bent. For someone like Madison, that sting lasts longer than any shouted insult. As for Daniel, his price was guilt, the heavy weight of realizing he'd almost abandoned his mother. But guilt can be a teacher. He leaned closer in those weeks, asking for advice he once brushed off, calling me just to say goodnight. Slowly, we stitched the tear between us. And me, my price was the ache of knowing things would never return to the simple innocence of before. Once trust cracks, even if mended, the line remains. But I carried that scar with pride because it meant I had stood my ground. On the eve of the wedding, I stood in my kitchen tying ribbons onto small jars of jam Ruth and I had prepared as favors for the Collins guests. Simple, homemade, sweet, our signature. Not chandeliers, not crystal, but love you could taste. As I worked, I looked up at Richard's photo. "We made it," I whispered. "They tried to erase us, but we're still here. Still standing." And in that quiet kitchen, I felt peace settle over me. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of knowing justice, at least in part, had been served. The day of the wedding dawned clear, the Iowa sky a soft blue brushed with wisps of white. Oak Ridge Banquet Hall had never looked finer, lanterns strung across the courtyard, tables set with crisp linens, the scent of roses drifting in from the garden. It should have been just another grand society wedding, polished and perfect. But for me, every detail shimmered with something deeper, proof that we had not been erased. The Collins family arrived early, 30 strong, their laughter echoing down the hallway as they found their seats. My sisters in bright dresses, cousins from out-of-state church ladies, carrying the same warmth they'd shown at every funeral, every graduation, every potluck. They filled the room with life, with belonging. I stood at the back for a moment, taking it all in. For weeks, I had feared silence, isolation. Now the sound of my people was a balm to every wound. Ruth caught my eye across the room and winked, and I knew we had already won. Madison swept in soon after, glittering in white satin, her smile fixed like porcelain. Evelyn followed in a pale suit, chin, high, eyes cool. They walked past the Collins guests with polite nods. But their stiffness told the whole story. They hadn't wanted us here, and yet here we were woven into the day they thought they controlled. The ceremony itself was simple, beautiful. Daniel looked nervous at first, but when he caught sight of me in the crowd, his shoulders eased. For the first time in months, I saw my son not as a man pulled in two directions, but as the boy I once held at baseball games, proud and steady. After vows were exchanged and rings slipped on the hall filled with applause, both families rose two sides of a room that had once threatened to split forever. Dinner passed with polite conversation, though undercurrents ran sharp. The Whitakers laughed with their city friends. The Collinses swapped stories of road trips and barn dances. Two worlds at one table, awkward yet undeniable. Then came the moment I had waited for. The toast. I rose slowly, smoothing my dress pearls, catching the candlelight. The room quieted, glasses lifted. My dear friends, my beloved family, I began, my voice carrying clear. Tonight we celebrate not only Daniel and Madison, but the joining of two families. For a time, it seemed that some might be left behind. But love, when it is true, has a way of remembering. Love insists on inclusion. A murmur rippled through the Collins side agreement relief. On the Whitaker side, faces stiffened, smiles tightened. I continued steady as stone. Family is not clutter. It is not something to trim away for the sake of appearances. Family is roots, and without roots, no tree stands for long. Tonight, every root is present. Every branch is accounted for. I lifted my glass. To family, all of it. May we never forget that wealth fades, beauty changes, but loyalty endures. The Collins guests rose in unison, their voices warm as they echoed the toast. On the other side, there were clinks of glass too, but quieter forced. Madison's smile faltered, Evelyn's lips pressed tight. They knew, as did everyone, that my words had cut sharper than any insult could. I sat my heart steady. For the first time in weeks, peace draped over me like a shawl. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of dignity restored. Then Daniel stood, glass in hand. His voice shook at first, but grew stronger with each word. I want to thank my mother, he said, looking straight at me. She raised me with nothing but determination, love, and faith. Tonight is possible because of her. I am proud to be her son. Proud to have both families here. Proud to begin this marriage on a foundation of honesty. The hall hushed, then erupted in applause. Tears blurred my eyes, but my smile held. In that moment, the boy I raised and the man he had become stood together. Across the table, Madison's face stiffened, her smile thin. Evelyn looked away, her glass untouched. Their loss wasn't public humiliation. It was knowing they could no longer rewrite the story without me. Later, as music swelled and dancing began, I slipped outside to the courtyard. The night air was cool, stars scattered like blessings across the sky. I sat on a stone bench, listening to the muffled laughter from inside, and let the weight of it all settle. Richard's handkerchief was still in my purse. I pulled it out, pressed it to my lips, and whispered, "We did it." We stood our ground. The cicadas hummed. Lantern light flickered through the leaves, and for the first time in months, my heart was quiet. Because here's the truth, friend. Life will test how much dignity you're willing to defend. People may try to buy your silence, erase your place, treat you like background noise in your own story. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the gathering of strength before you speak. And when you finally do speak, when you stand your ground with grace instead of rage, the world has no choice but to listen. That was my lesson. That was my victory. And if you've ever felt erased, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this: you are not clutter. You are roots. And roots hold everything together.